All right. I would like to start by thanking all those who are already on the call. And I would like to welcome you for this series of our interdisciplinary seminar series. We all know this is a series that has been going on here at Tuskegee for the past 12 years. It is a series in which we bring some of our best and brightest minds to talk and share with us their expertise, what they think, what they know. They are opinion leaders. They are experts in their own domain. And today we are fortunate to have one of ours, Mr. Sanchuan Mufopa, who is an ex-student, who is an alumnus from Tuskegee, and an engineer in his own right, a novelist, and what have you. However, we will have him introduced by one of our own. But before I hand over the floor to Ms. Buchanan, who will be introducing our speaker, I would like to acknowledge our sponsors. And amongst our sponsors, we have the Andrew Mellon Foundation, the Tuskegee University Faculty Senate, the National Park Services, the College of Arts and Sciences, the College of Agriculture, Environment, and Nutrition Sciences, the Office of the Provost, the Office of Students Engagement Initiatives, and university-wide honors program. We want to also acknowledge the Department of Modern Languages, Communication, and Philosophy. So to our sponsors, we thank them for their unrelenting support for what we do here at Tuskegee and in this seminar series. And I would just like to cede the floor, or before I cede the floor, let me do a few housekeeping. If any of you were to intervene, to ask a question, or to say something, please turn on your video. Turn on your video. We would like to see the person behind the question. Don't do it in hiding. All right, so on this note, I will cede the floor to Miss Kaya Buchanan, who would present our speaker for the day. So thank you very much, Ms. Buchanan. Just a word about yourself, and you present our speaker for the day.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I am Kai Buchanan, a sophomore elementary education major, and I'm delighted to introduce our guest speaker, Shashwan Mufopa. I would like to start with an explanation of what his name means. The name Shashwang Mufopa means Shashwang, son of Fopa, in Shirambo. Shashwang is a short form of the beautiful phrase, "You make an offer and we shall pay," which in essence signifies that the child bearing this name is priceless and his parents will give everything just to have him. Shashwang, a husband and father of two, he is also the youngest of a very large family, a family in which the boundary between science and arts is inexistent. It is in this family environment that he was able to nurture his love for engineering and literature. Many at times, life in school imposed on him the choice between arts and sciences, but he always managed to find a way to combine them in his day-to-day life. He was a key member of the high school science club, editor for the school newspaper, and actor in the school drama club. Shashwang Mufopa basked in art science titration, which he concocted for himself all through his secondary education. But that was not something unique. His father before him was an English speaking science teacher who switched up and became a French teacher, and his mother, an arts and crafts teacher who at some point became a biology teacher. So to Shashwang, education was the meeting point of science and arts rather than the junction separating both academic orientations. He pursued college studies in Cameroon, Maryland, Alabama, and Florida. The heavy burden of college studies and full time jobs made it difficult for him to perpetuate his art science balancing act. But every college English course was a chance for him to reconnect with reading and writing. While attending Tuskegee University, he even ventured in the performing at a few open mic poetry and slam sessions in Auburn, Alabama, and in Columbus, Georgia. After a successful academic journey in the universes of sciences and engineering, studying physics, electrical engineering, and systems engineering, Shashwang finally reconnected with literature and published his first book, Unbreakable Chains. This first book was a gift to their two beautiful children, and the one he is currently and slowly working on bear testimony of his desire to infuse his engineering know-how into the art of writing. Amongst the many schools and colleges he has attended, he considers Tuskegee University as a school where he truly learned how to be a Black man in America and in the world. The place where he witnessed what he considers the greatest academic contributions of Black history after the University of Timbuktu, which is the joint legacy of Booker T. Washington and George Washington Carver. Tuskegee University is also a place where he understood the power of history when it is used for the right purpose. These days, Shashwang Mufopa is working on obtaining a PhD in systems engineering and on his literature piece. But this grandson of a griot and a king, both of whom lived through the colonization of Africa, this little Bantu boy raised by parents who were teachers and educated through storytelling and chants by the fireside, firmly believes that it is his duty as an author and an engineer to join others and serve the greater purpose of restoring, rebranding, and building Black history, engineering Black history. To tell a story from the lion's perspective, to walk in the steps of African scientists such as Sheikh Anta Diop, Birago Diop, and Chinua Achebe, all of whom use their scientific background to impact the history of the Black community. Now, please join me in giving our guest speaker a warm Tuskegee welcome. TU.
You know, unmute yourself, and that was not good enough. Restate it, TU, and let's hear everybody.
All right, let's try again. TU.
You know.
Thank you,
You
everyone.
know.
Unmute yourself, Mr. Mufopa.
All right, thank you. It's good to be home. I would say it's a pleasure to see all these faces and to hear that amazing call of Tuskegee. Thank you guys for tuning in and thank you for having me. Normally, when you come back home, you just walk and you just badge and you don't need to introduce yourself. But nonetheless, I couldn't stand but show much appreciation for this warm introduction by Ms. Buchanan about who I am and how Tuskegee shaped me. And before I start, I would just say this. When I came to Tuskegee, I used to joke around and said I didn't choose Tuskegee, Tuskegee chose me. Little did I know the impact of that phrase. Tuskegee did choose me to make me who I am, and it was like coming to America a second time. It was actually coming to America. The first time I was coming to America more like a student, but when I went to Tuskegee, I actually came to America like a man. And so I'm honored and happy to be amongst you today. What else can I say? But if you guys are ready, let's get started. Let's talk about engineering. Let's talk about literature. Let's talk about Blackness. Let's talk about history. Let's talk about Black history. Rest assured, at the end of the class or of this discussion, excuse me, you won't have to do triple integral or third order derivatives or Taylor-Maclaurin series. This is an unusual engineering presentation. So why engineering Black history? Let's start by defining a few things. History, commonly, I would just go from what I knew as a young student, right? History was referred to as the study of past important events. Now, that definition usually bothers me a little bit because I always ponder who decides what is important and what is not, right? So we'll talk about that. And engineering is this amazing discipline where you look for problems. That's the only discipline where you actually go looking for problems. You look for problems because you want to be able to find solutions. And for most of my childhood, what you have heard through the presentation, I was divided between sciences and arts, right? But the older I got, I realized how the two converge more and more. I've been with the Department of Defense for almost 10 years today. Got my 10 years badge last year, actually. So I'm heading to almost 11 years. And so coming into the Department of Defense in my mind was the typical engineering course. You will look for a problem and you solve. But rest assured, engineering has what we call reverse engineering, where you have something and you go backwards to see how it was created. How was that solution created to address a problem? And usually when we do that, it's because we either want to document the system, we want to improve the system, or want to understand how to prevent that system from being victim of certain problems in the environment. So my discussion about engineering Black history today will clearly be those two facets of engineering. So we will have your reverse engineering aspect of engineering Black history. We have the engineering aspect where we look for solutions to the problems. And then furthermore, we will have that proactive one where you engineer solutions for problems that are yet to be discovered. All right. So that kind of summarizes what I'll be talking about, what we will be discussing about. I want to look at this more like an exchange under the baobab tree, you know, like a barbershop discussion where I don't do all the talking. If you agree or you don't agree, you jump in, you ask a question, you chip in, and we exchange. So I'll go right ahead and start with the whole idea of reverse engineering, right? We break down systems in engineering. We decompose them into modules, into components, and we try to understand how they interface, how they interact to produce a solution to achieve a common purpose. And somewhat history does that because history is like going back in time, and that's what reverse engineering does. You go back in time to find what was happening. For the longest time, we have history written for us and not by us. Now, the argument is there's been a lot of Black historians, and that is true. But how far back do we go when we write our own history? That's a question we should ask ourselves. And once we get to understand that there's still much about our history that we do not tell, then we start working on creating, reverse engineering that history. Because it's important for us to know that history. It's important for those coming after us to understand that history. An example, and I will start with the writers that were mentioned in the introduction. A good example to this will be someone like Cheikh Anta Diop, Senegalese writer, poet, politician. But beyond all, he was an anthropologist and a physicist. Again, you see he has all this science baggage. So don't think science is just for scientists. Science can very well be useful in history and in literature as well. Cheikh Anta Diop is responsible for explaining to the rest of the world the origin of humanity, proving beyond doubt that humanity finds its origin in Africa, and showing that Africa, the Kemet culture is not just limited to Egypt, but it spreads out through sub-Saharan Africa, right? And for him to be able to do that, he had to base himself on carbon dating, which is something he did as a physicist. So you see right from there how he uses his scientific knowledge to go back into time and prove a historical fact, an anthropological fact. And that is a call, that's what I like to call the empirical research, where you go and seek the data and actually prove the facts. And that's one thing that us as historians, scientists, have to do about the Black history. We should not just content ourselves about starting at some point that seems suitable. Usually it's very much usually the transatlantic slave trade. That seems to be a good point of reference, and we go from there. Little is, or enough is said, but more can be said about the empires and the communities that existed, about how those systems in pre-historic Africa was well developed, and how you could actually see them engineering stuff. I'll give you a typical example about how profound Africa was at that time in terms of engineering, and connect that to history. Did you know that one of the things, and I took the course at Tuskegee, by the way, I took a course on cryptography, encryption, how to encrypt data. And while they were teaching that course, it dawned on me that my maternal culture, they used to send messages using drums. But these drum beats were encoded in such a way that not everybody could understand the message that was being transmitted, which was a proof of the use of encryption, which is seldom talked about when you read African history. Our history is just, there was a kingdom, there was a king, there were people, some people were taken, shipped to the Americas, and let's move on. Who talks about that engineering aspect of that ancient Africa? Who talks about the genius of people like Mansa Musa, who were strong economists, to this point considered the richest man that has ever walked the surface of the earth? Who talks about these people who could perform surgery with very limited tools? They barely talk about these people. And it is the responsibility of historians and writers to bring these stories out. Why will I insist on writers? Because I'll tell you this straight up. People read more books than they read published articles. Very few people go on Google Scholar just to go pick an article about something, but they will find it interesting if they read it through a book, a novel, through a poem, see it through a play. It's the duty of those writing stories, whether it's through literature or through history, to bring out these facts, this engineering, this cultural, this social facts about what it means to be a Black, both in America and in Africa. Now, another person I will bring in this discussion will be Birago Diop, still a Senegalese, by the way. Birago Diop, as you might have heard during the introduction, I am a huge fan of bedtime stories. My parents and my grandparents and my uncles, it's a cultural thing. When we're done having dinner, we sit around the fire or around the lantern, and it's story time. And the stories were always concocted with some sort of genius. They will use animals to symbolize virtues and to educate children to love the nature around them, but to understand that nature is a teacher to them. If you ask my kids, who's a tortoise, they will tell you the tortoise is the smartest animal in the jungle. And that is how I was taught. Why? Because slow and steady wins the race. So basically, what African culture did, what Black history should bring out, is the African culture had for essence to capture some aspects of life that if you do not pay attention, you can easily miss them. Birago Diop, as I said, was a veterinarian, and what he did was, as part of his field trip in the in the deep side of Senegal and meeting all these farmers and herdsmen, he told them to recount stories to him, which he documented and then published as these beautiful stories about animals and humans interacting, with that very intimate desire to transmit knowledge, to transmit history, to transmit the idea that the people before you were not just ordinary people. They were sophisticated, powerful, and smart population that knew what they were doing. That's the second scientist I'm introducing you to. I'm not trying to say here that you didn't have non-scientist people writing books. No, they did. But because the topic is engineering Black history, I want to show us how being an engineer doesn't limit us to sitting down and doing Bernoulli's equations or working on Schrodinger's equation. We can contribute to this idea of Black history, and there's a way we can do that. We can do that by becoming writers. We can do that by incorporating our science to the history of the Black people. I mean, Tuskegee knows best. When we talk of George Washington Carver, I mean, the number, about 300 ways of using peanut butter. I mean, come on, that is invention, and invention is the closest things you get to scientist, right? And you know that at that time, for someone to be able to come up with that much inventions, at the time when there was this stereotype that, you know, people of color were not the smartest, to have someone like Booker T come up with the idea of Tuskegee University and to see it standing today, that tells you how that history, which we seem not to care about, has been through a lot and has survived. But how long will it survive if we do not contribute in recanting those stories? Whether they're the engineering successes or the literature successes, we need to talk about them in books, in our works. We need to engineer them. And I'm still at the phase of reverse engineering. That is, we're going back to understand what happened and we expose it to those, our contemporaries and those that come after us. The third, and he's my best author, Chinua Achebe, was also a scientist. And he wrote he wrote many books, amongst which is Things Fall Apart. Things Fall Apart has this uniqueness that it's not just your common storybook. It's a story that has, for at least when I read it, the goal is to deconstruct the idea people had about the African society before the arrival of, you know, the colonials. He shows a sophisticated society. He shows how people could move from the least class in society to the top by hard work. He shows how people could live as a community, having multiple districts forming one big population. I mean, the book in itself tells a story, but it's written with this engineering style of showing how parts come together to fulfill a bigger purpose. For some of you, that might just sound very simple, but when you study system engineering, it is linked to what we call system of systems, where you get systems that can function independently, but you bring them together to create a solution which otherwise they will not be able to produce by themselves. It is that congregation of those systems that produce that bigger purpose. And if you read Chinua Achebe, you understand it's not just about the Igbo culture. It shows you how the Igbo clan was broken down into pieces that will come together when it's time of war. It shows you how he could be the foster father to a child to the point where a warrior could become a baby in front of a child. It shows you how in his fight for his people, when he realized colonization wasn't what he wanted, he fought to the point where what we call today depression existed and was known. And for those who understand what I mean, Okonkwo got to a point where he was depressed. I won't spoil it to you. I'll give you the pleasure to read the book. Trust me, if you have a chance, you want to touch on Chinua Achebe. But that story continues. My discussion about this continues because beyond Chinua Achebe, I had the pleasure on this interdisciplinary seminar series of Tuskegee to listen to Miss Jane Elliott and to understand that the same people that we celebrate, because so far I've been talking about Black scientists and Black authors, the same work has been done in America. I mean, one of the people I look up to when I listen to Black American history or African American history, when you want to understand that, you need to read people like Maya Angelou. You need to be familiar with the works of so many writers. There's one particular guy that his name will come back, I'll recall it. But you want to be familiar with that because it tells you a story that you did not know. Now, for most of our audience here, you might have studied it in history, you might have heard about it in everyday discussion, but for someone like me who comes from Cameroon, who comes from the Bantu land, it made the difference, understanding that I was in a school that was founded at a time when it wasn't possible for Blacks to attend other schools. And that school has gone on to be such a big school as Tuskegee University. It changed my perspective from being a student as I was at the University of Maryland to being a student at Tuskegee University. So what I'm trying to say is that is a common problem shared by people of color, whether you're in Africa, in America, or anywhere in the world, you have that same problem where we have a history that we have to recant. Sometimes we think, I know it, but what about the other people? Do they know it? That is why we kick in. That is where we start talking about engineering. We leave the domain of reverse engineering to proper engineering, to actually building things, building bridges. I like to say this. Every Black person book to read, and every Black soul to tell. Until you get to know someone, it's hard for you to fully understand who they are. One of the things I think literature should do, and this is my perspective, is bridge the gap between people of color in America and people of color elsewhere. Because there's some sort of discontinuity. People don't understand why maybe Black immigrants have a certain way of doing things, or African Americans have a certain way of doing things. The only way you can understand is by understanding the culture, by approaching the people, by reading the books. And that is where one of the things we have to do as engineers, not just engineers, but any person who builds the story using words has to do, is bring that history which the others do not know and put it in front of them. When you read books, you start understanding the tribulations and trials that the African American people have been through, and you start understanding certain things and why certain things are done certain ways. I tell you, hands down, I didn't know what soul food was until my roommate at Tuskegee told me what soul food was. I just heard soul food. I never really know what it meant. And I had to ask him, I said, hey, dog, why do we call this soul food? He said, yes, it's good for the soul, but it's not good for the body. I didn't know about the black knot. Some of you probably know what the black knot is. In Maryland, I wasn't familiar with that. And I come to Tuskegee, and every time I see a person of color, there's that little, nod of the head. And I asked a friend of mine, and she's a Tuskegee graduate as well, Monique Harris, what's up with that? She says, it's just an acknowledgement to say, I see you. Now, from my perspective, I come from somewhere where I don't need to tell someone I see you. Everybody looks like me. Left and right, they all look like me. I don't need to be, hey, I see you. But when you understand what it means, you understand that is not just an acknowledgement. I'll give you a very good example. In Chirambo, they're asked to actually name, they say something like Ligi Call. Ligi, if you go word by word, and don't quote me on this, I'm not a linguistic expert, but I'll just go for word translation. Ligi in Chirambo means the eye. Ligi Call kind of means, what does your eye see? In some cultures, I see you. So when we ask someone's name in my native tongue, you're actually wanting to see who they are, which is equivalent to the nod I get when I'm at Tuskegee or I'm at Atlanta or anywhere else. But who tells that story? If I didn't tell you this, you wouldn't understand that the black nod is universal, right? It just has different ways of being personified, but it's the same thing. We need to put those in stories. We need to write those down. As I said, people read books more than they read journals. So in the course of engineering, that is where I, in my own way, came up with Unbreakable Chains. Unbreakable Chains for me was a healing experience, but it was a congregating experience to unite the two versions of who I'd become. I remember a friend from Rwanda once told me, you will forever be divided between America and Africa. Every time you'll be in Africa, you'll miss the social comfort of America. And every time you'll be in America, you'll miss, that warmth of Africa. And it's true, the older I get, I can sense that. But when I worked on this piece of work, Unbreakable Chains that you see here, my goal was to help my children navigate that duality of who they are. And the only way I could do it was through the books. And the only way I could also do it was to incorporate knowledge about our people that seem not to be documented. I wanted them to understand where you come from. People were smart. They knew how to do things. They were not just people living in the middle of nowhere. They were a community. They were smart. They had kings. They had queens. They had what is the equivalent of the Congress, right? They had what is the equivalent of secret services, nothing happened, by sheer coincidence. They come from a thoughtful society. And the only way I could tell them that, even when I get older, even if I'm not here, would be through the book Unbreakable Chains. And for those who might have had the chance of reading the book, it's full of scientific descriptions. That is just my touch. That is just me being an engineer. I just, put it there, put it there, and put it there. But what I would tell you, this is where it got interesting to me. If you look at the cover page of the book, what you see is, Pan-African colors, strands. And the guy who did the art, I don't know him. He doesn't know me personally. But when I saw the artwork he did for the book, something told me, job well done. Because by essence, he captured the one thing I was trying to tell my children and my audience through my book. He took DNA strands and gave them Pan-African colors. He took science to make them identify themselves, to tell them where you come from and where you're going to. That is what I mean, engineering. I mean, we've talked about reverse engineering. We're talking about engineering. One of the things we as contemporary have to do as we engineer those stories is to remember that our children and the children of our children will read those stories. Now, not everybody's a writer. Not everybody wants to spend hours in front of a computer, or not everybody wants to try to trick the world by using ChatGPT. But I'll tell you this, though, if you consider that every person is a book, then you are a page of Black history. The way you live your life is writing the book. If you consider that every soul is a story that needs to be told, then you understand you cannot traverse your existence in this world without telling your own story. So engineering Black history is not just through books, as some of us have done. It's also through the way you live. It's also knowing that I belong to Tuskegee University. Wherever I go, I will tell people I went to Tuskegee University. That is what being an engineering Black history is. And there's another fold to this process of engineering Black history: anticipating problems of the future, projecting possible problems and working on those. Because as I said, engineering is a threefold thing. You reverse engineer, yes. You engineer for a certain problem, and you also engineer to anticipate future problems. And so how do we do the engineering for future problems? First part is to remember you are a book by yourself, and you try to live your life a way that your children and the people seeing you know that you've laid the right foundation for them to move on. Now, the other part is very personal, but I'll put it down this way. You want to know where you come from. You want to know what your DNA traces to. And the good thing is, if you do what we call African DNA, you don't need to do for everyone in your family. Once one person does it, it applies to everyone on your matrilineal side. The reason you want to know where you come from is because we say when you know where you come from, you already have an idea where you're heading to. In the last recent years, the country of Ghana, which is in West Africa, has initiated a lot of efforts in offering to African Americans the opportunity to reconnect with their African roots, to go through the gates where once upon a time people of color were taken forcefully out of their land. And that is an effort one should applaud. But the question is it reciprocated? Do we go there actually? Is it just a possibility that we have, but we don't do it? Well, some will say it's costful. True. But I like to say this: every book, when it's well written, is a passport with a visa to a place. You can visit those places by reading the books. I challenge you to read authors like Wole Soyinka, Chinua Achebe, to read the books of people of other cultures, to better understand the history and your history. As I said, if you do a DNA, You can know the people you're from. You can know if you're Igbo. You can know if you're Yoruba. That is high. It's a high level thing to know. That doesn't take away from you that you're American. You just know where you come from. I was joking with my daughter this afternoon. She heard me say towel, and she says, "No, you say towel." I said, "Well, you're American. You say towel. I said towel." I want her to embrace the fact that she's American and Cameroonian at the same time. And we should be able, as Americans, to embrace that unknown aspect of where our ancestors came from. Not because it's going to take anything from you or particularly add anything from you, but it gives you a point of reference. Again, back to engineering, one of the things we do in engineering is have a point of reference, have a baseline for every configuration. We have somewhere, you have to start somewhere. You say, hey, here's where I start and I build from here. In everyday life, everybody does that. For those of you who are taking Professor Bill in these classes, I'm sure you have like a thesis statement in your paragraphs before you start building on them. You need a point of reference. And that engineering of Black history for the future requires that point of reference. We need that point of reference. You need to be that point of reference for your children. And in your family, I guarantee you that heroes and heroines you can lean on as point of reference. Well, I stand today and part of the introduction said I'm working on a PhD. That was not even in my plans, I'll tell you that. But one of the reasons I decided if this is what I have to do, I must do it, is based on the history of who I am. My grandfather did not speak the Queen's language. He was a king, but he spoke Churambo. That was it. He wasn't fluent in English. He couldn't read or write. But what did this person do? He sent his children to British schools, and he gave them the responsibility. Every day you come home, you come teach me what you learn at school. I'm talking about kids teaching their father, a king. Imagine you're just a kid. You're like 7, 8, and you have to teach a king. God knows how difficult that can be. And they will teach their father. And when he gets a hang of it, my dad said he will sit on the porch and read so loud that the people in the kingdom will be, wow, the king can understand and read the queen's language. When you have a grandfather like that, tell me why I will not go to school and best myself. How you engineer Black history in the future. You give yourself as a point of reference for those coming after you. Make sure they have no excuse. We know the statistics. We know how the typical Black family is in America. Some of us are lucky to have both parents, some are not so lucky. But that's not a problem. That is a concern. That's an issue. We can build from that. We can set that marker, that point of reference. This is what happened. I'm going to make it different. This guy, Eric Thomas, a motivational speaker, E.T., when you hear his story, he was not destined to be a PhD holder or a motivational speaker. But his story tells you you can't quit. If E.T. didn't quit, why would you quit? So my point is engineering that future or futuristic Black history starts with you. We've talked about reverse engineering. We've talked about great writers, inventors, and engineers. We've talked about current history and the things around us. We're now talking how we can build that future. So, ladies and gentlemen, I could go on and on and on, but I want this to be an exchange. I want to give you a chance to ask me your questions, to tell me what you think about engineering Black history. And as I said, the word engineering shouldn't scare you. You shouldn't necessarily use derivatives or integrals to tell me what you need to say. I want you to see that engineering as building Black history, building it in three folds. Reverse engineering, know those who have done the work before you. Current history, document what you are doing. Tell people what you know. Don't keep it to yourself. And engineering that future history is look in your family and say, I too will be a point of reference for those coming after me. Some of you are the first college students in your family. Let nobody tell you any less. That is one of the greatest achievements ever. What would you do with that position of power you have now? Remember, knowledge is power, only when it's in good hands. Let nobody just tell you knowledge is power. It must be in good hands. And being in good hands means it's handled properly. And the beautiful thing about knowledge, it only multiplies. Me teaching you doesn't reduce what I know, it just makes two people knowing the same thing. So tonight, if anything else, engineering Black history, you know something about your family I don't know. I know something about my family you don't know. I want us to share that. On books, Facebook post, Twitter post, talk about who you are. Talk about your contribution to Black history. Talk about the heroes in your family. Let it not just be February is when we just chill Black History Month. We have to tell that history. It's time for the lion to tell its own version of the story. Let alone nobody wants to listen to it. We don't care. We have to tell our own version of the story. It doesn't suffice to say the hunter told their version, but what is your version? I bet you your version and our version, when you mix it with all the diversity, will be such a beautiful version. Thank you so much. And I would love to listen to your questions. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mufopa, for that riveting intervention. And I believe in the audience, there would be questions, there would be commentaries. I would just like, if you have a question, unmute yourself and turn on your video and say what you have to say. Thank you.
Okay. I have a question. I'll go.
All right.
My name is Lauren Glenn. And my question is, what brings you like day-to-day happiness as you go through your journey of life and continue in engineering?
That's a very good question. And interestingly enough, that's a question my daughter likes to ask: what makes you happy? What makes you happy every day? And personally, I find joy in the very small things I do. And maybe it has to do with the engineering that person that I am. Like I never I'm never idle. I always have a project going on, and I will work on something, and it's those little successes that make me happy. You know, fixing the alarm clock, that is good for the day. Getting the tire changed on my car, I'm like, whew, made it. It's those that's some of little things that make me happy. Now, understand happiness is not a continuous flow, right? It's an aggregate. At the end of the day, are you happy? Did you find happiness? Yes, you will have some dips and some things will make you sad. But if you didn't have those lows, where would you get the high? So when something happens, find a way to bounce back. And that bouncing is what makes you happy. I'll just give you a quick example. In this month of February, and we're talking about last week till this day, um, we're looking about in my family, we've lost about 4 people, right? Back to back. And that can be depressing. And I was talking to my mom today. We had to turn around and say in that same family, we had 3 newborn babies in the month of February. And you find that as happiness. And my wife will put it this way: death is painful to those who remain, but to who has gone before, the journey continues. And once you put that in perspective, you bounce back. So it's those little things. I just find little things that make me happy, and I press on. That's kind of how I operate, because it's the sum of those little things. At the end of the day, when you're closing your eyes, you're shutting your eyes to go to bed, you're like, wow, yeah, I did do something good today. Yeah. So yeah, that's what makes me happy on a daily basis.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, I see Dr. Dent's hand up. Dr. Dent, the care.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yes. Can you adjust your camera a little bit so we can? That's good.
Okay, hello. My name is Takia Dent. I'm a senior computer information systems major. I wanted to know if you can give yourself, your undergrad self advice, what would it be and why?
Wow, if I could give my undergrad self an advice, um, it will be the advice I will give, and I tell it to everyone, will be a repetition of Steve Jobs' commencement speech for Stanford University, I believe. It will all make sense when you look back. At that time, it doesn't make sense. The dot only connects when you look back. And to me, it applies so much. Doing system engineering, I only encountered system engineering during my last semester in my undergrad. It was like, I just need one extra class to graduate. Hey, they're giving a capstone class. What system engineering? Let's go up. Here am I doing a PhD in system engineering. It adds up. And when I moved to the Navy base, the guy introducing system engineering role said, hey, if you study physics, this will be fun. And I scratched my head. I'm like, hey, I did some physics in Cameroon. This adds up. So I would tell my younger self, go for it. It will make sense looking back. And that's the whole point of engineering. You say all those things will sum up to give something better. Therefore, don't tell yourself, I don't need it. I don't need to study probability, or I don't need to take a language course. If you feel in your gut you need it, or you find it interesting, go for it. Don't just go for it for the grade, go for it for the knowledge. And once you get the knowledge, put it in good hands. So yeah, that'll be my, if I could tell myself, that'll be what I'll tell myself. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments? I expect them to be coming.
I hope I didn't put you guys to sleep. I hope not. Come on, Tuskegee University, guys. Let's go.
Well, while waiting for somebody to say something, I know you did mention the fact that Chinua Achebe was a scientist. And I'm just curious, first of all, knowing the little knowledge I have of your role in the DOD, right? Your job as an engineer. Could you talk a little bit about the kind of things you do at the DOD that might have inspired you to look at a literature or a literary piece like that of Chinua Achebe to be an engineering feat or a reverse engineering feat? Could you tell me? I know you've said a whole lot
Yeah.
about engineering, but I want to dig into your specific role at the DoD, right? You don't have
Right.
to. You don't have to release any secret defense. We are
Of
not
course.
here for that.
Of course.
Just say what is can be public knowledge without disclosing everything that is secret defense. Thank you.
Well, so career-wise and how it connects to my interpretation of Things Fall Apart by Chinua Achebe, I'll put it this way. I've been, I am in an environment where most people will stay on the same project for years and years. You're talking about someone being on the same project for 7, 8 years. And everybody knows when I get on board the project, I tell them I jump ship. That means once I know what I know, I move on. Don't expect me to stay on a project for so long. But in the course of doing that, one of the things I started enjoying was we call it SOP, statement of purpose, where as I said, I love literature. So that was the biggest mistake my employee did when they started saying, you write statement of purpose for systems. So I have to understand how a system works, and I document how it should be handled and all that kind of stuff. And in the course of doing that, you start finding yourself connecting science to literature. You want to write it with all the beauty of literature, but at the same time, you don't want to bore the scientist who's reading it. And as you're doing it, you realize, oh, science and literature actually merge. It's the sum of these paragraphs that make the story beautiful. The way I describe this event before the next event is what makes this more captivating. And that connects you to your first love, whatever book gave you that passion for literature. And that instinctively brought me to Things Fall Apart, to Chinua Achebe's work, to see the way we travel with the main character from when he was a local hero because he was a wrestler to where he became a leader of his people and up to his demise. But the way he puts a story, he builds on that story. It inspires you to build a document that way. And not to boast about myself. I have a coworker who would always email me like, "I know you're enjoying doing this. Don't pretend. Go ahead and write the document." And I would do it. Of course, I'll pretend like, "Man, I don't have time." But deep inside, I was enjoying it. And actually, that is how my job made me think of what I love the most, like writing. I was like, okay, I can actually enjoy this if I write it the way I love things to be written. So it's that idea of what I'm doing. And this is like a deja vu, which my deja vu was the way Chinua Achebe did his work. And I connected the two. So that's how it worked for me. And it still works for me that way. I remember being on the writers conference at Gulf Coast State College, and a participant mentioned something like, "Oh, it's good for you engineers because you're so structured and it's so easy for you to write." And I almost laughed. I was like, I'm coming for literature because of the freedom of doing things the way I want, not because of the structure from engineering. But then when I started writing, I realized he was correct to a certain extent. The description of my book is usually using scientific tools to tell my story. I create modules and I connect them through space and time and try to make my reader travel to different places while being on the spot. And that's all credit to the people like Chinua Achebe, who were like my first introduction to African literature, should I say.
Wow. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I have a question here that reads, it's from Pennington, DeAnthony Pennington. How did you keep yourself motivated throughout your process, your journey? All right. How do you keep yourself motivated? Someone once says, motivation comes a lot with excitement, so it dies after a while. Discipline does the rest. So if you bank on motivation, there'll be days you won't go to the gym. There'll be days you won't pick your book. You have to, once motivation is there, you have to find a way to bring discipline. And for discipline not to be a burden, you have to make it a routine. When you do it so often, it goes from being boredom but part of your everyday routine up to the point that you miss doing it. So to keep myself motivated was always, what do I like? What do I enjoy? I enjoy this. Okay, how do I bring it into what I'm doing? And I'll put it this way. Unbreakable Chains, I started writing it in 2016 and it was published 2022. You understand, writing that took a while, but you make it, the motivation was there because our first baby was on the way. But when she was born and I had to keep writing, you have to make it a discipline. So motivation usually comes first. And the way you keep yourself motivated is by adding a few drops of discipline to that motivation. So the days you are low on energy, you do it because it's part of your routine. And then, as I was telling Dr. Dent, was at the end, it connects, it makes sense. Looking back, it all makes sense. It might not make sense right now, but in the future, when you look back, it will all make sense. Eric has his hand up. Yep. Yes, sir. Eric.
Hey, Dania. It's Eric here.
Yeah.
Your classmate from Cameroon.
Of course.
Secondary school.
Yeah.
Dania, I'm very happy and proud of you. You have always been a reference, and
thank you.
You continue to be one.
Thank you.
I have a question. You talked about DNA test for people like us who come from Cameroon. How useful and accurate will a DNA test be for me if I want to take it? How useful and accurate? I don't believe the DNA system have a lot of data for Africans like you and me. I don't.
Now, I know we go from the precept. I know who my mom is, who my grandmother is. I don't need a DNA test, right? But I'll put it this
Correct.
way. I don't introduce myself as a Cameroonian American, as I'm a Bantu American, because I'm deconstructing the boundaries that people created for me. I want people to know I'm Bantu before anything. And doing that DNA helps you in that sense that you realize you belong to something bigger than just a tribe. Like you and I, we know we're connected because we are Tikas, right? Despite that, there's that divide. We know it's a way of making Kwame Nkrumah's dream come true without using the boundaries put by the colonial master. It's saying, I want to be a Bantu who talks to the semi-Bantu person. I don't want to be the guy from this tribe or that tribe. And I'll give you another example. For an African that I am, why would I do my DNA? Because I think DNA existed even before they came up with a double-stranded picture of the DNA. So in the Bambalan kingdom, which you know is where I'm from, the personal guard of the king must be the child of one of the princesses, right? They don't, why? It seems benign, but it's from a DNA perspective. The child of a female is the child of the female. There's no question about that. The child of the male, God alone knows. The female knows who is the father of that child. But the child of a princess is of the royal blood, and it's DNA. And if you go further, so it means a lot to us, but because it's ingrained in our culture and we know where we from, and sometimes to also know where you migrated from, to know who you connected to. My wife is from the Adamawa region, right? And I'm from the Northwest region, but we're all Tikas, right? We're connected.
Yeah.
So to know that Spike Lee is Tika, to know that Blair Underwood is Tika, to know that what's her name? Erika Badu is Tika. To me, it's a pleasure. I wouldn't know that if I don't know I'm a Tika. So when I do my DNA, I know I'm not just from the Boyakum kingdom. I know I'm a Bantu for sure, and I know I belong to the Tika people. And then I can also celebrate my cousins that were taken a long time away from me. If I go to a party, I can say I know Spike Lee, we're relatives. Let me in, and there's no doubt about that. He's a Tika, I'm a Tika. So yeah, I think to us it applies in that sense that it's building that bridge. We have to build a bridge. What Ghana is doing is beautiful, but that is just at the political level. We have to set the example. We have to be able to tell people what our names mean, for example. We have to be able to tell them, hey, I'm technically Nigerian, but guess what? The reason why I feel the same as this Cameroonian is because we belong to the same bigger group of people. And how do I know that? Because our DNA maps us to this ethnic group of Africa. So I think to me, that's my humble opinion. Like we do the DNA, not because we don't know, but because it adds credibility to that 50 shades of blackness around the globe, how we're interconnected, how someone will be able to tell you, hey, I did my DNA and I'm from the Mende tribe in Sierra Leone. And you will be able to say, yes, I'm also from the Mende tribe because this is my DNA. It's not just I'm from this tribe. You can also prove to them you're connected. So that's how I see it.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. You're welcome.
No other hands up?
I have a question that I'd like to ask.
Yeah,
Okay,
go ahead.
go right ahead, Xavier. Why don't you put your camera on? Thank you.
There we go.
Okay.
Okay, so my question was, if there were like any setbacks you went through either during your job or through your schooling, how did you bounce back from those setbacks without letting it weigh you down? If that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. Setbacks. There were a lot of setbacks. There were a lot of setbacks. One of them was the very basic. Was the one of them was moving to somewhere to America. That was it sounds funny, right? America is a land of opportunity, but moving to America was a setback for me because it happened at the time when maybe I was still too much of a kid, I would say, right? So I came to somewhere where I had to fend for myself. I had to, do things for myself. And how did I bounce off from that? As I said, I looked back and saw people who did the same. My dad, as I said, was a scientist and went to France where he knew nobody to learn French and become a French professor. So if my dad could do it, why can't I do it? And then I would joke around with my dad and I kept telling him, you got a master's and you speak Latin. I need a master's and speak my own language as well. So there were setbacks, but every time you look behind if you can, or you look to the side and look for people on which you to lean. Another setback, if I will give this other one as well, another setback is you're done graduating and you're applying for all these jobs and you don't just get jobs and you're like, I'm going to leave college. What will I do next? Right. And you're all confused. That happened to me too. I remember going to career fairs and asking myself, what next? I'm graduating in about a week or 2 weeks. What will I do next? Did I bounce off from that? I kept networking, and I think this is important. Staying in touch with people is very fundamental. My job is thanks to a friend with whom I went to undergrad. And I remember on the day of our graduation, he sent out this message and said, hey, there is this opportunity of doing a master at Tuskegee University. I'm graduating and I think you guys will like it. And I applied for it. And it worked for me. So bouncing back is not just having someone to lean on, it's also having someone to pull you up when you have no one to lean on. And that someone you can only have is by connecting with people. And I know it's hard for us engineers to easily connect with people, but I say this, one way to connect with people is to talk about yourself. Let them know who you are for real. And whether they connect with you or not, that will be the filter that will just, set things apart. So there'll be setbacks, but for me, bouncing back has always been the people around me. And the people who, when I'm in around, it's like the people behind me, like the people in my family, my lineage that served as a point of reference, and the people with whom I've been working this far. When I turn around and they're there to give me that, pep talk or just see how they're defending their weight, it encourages me to do the same, basically.
I have a question, please.
Yes,
Daniel,
Dr. Fishman.
how are you?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
Okay. My question is, have you always been so resilient, or is this something you picked up along the way?
All right. I'm tempted to say something I picked up along the way, but I'm also tempted to say I just didn't know that I was that resilient, actually.
You didn't know.
I didn't know. I'm discovering that part of me. A good example was when our first baby was on her way. I'm the youngest of my family. My wife is the youngest of her family, and we had never catered for a newborn. So we were like, how are we going to do this? I find myself swaddling the baby, spending nights up with the baby, things I never knew I could do. And to me, it has always been in the face of adversity. That's when you realize how strong you really are. But that is just part of the story. But also admitting that you are not that strong helps you discover ways to become strong. What do I mean by that? There have been situations where at work you've done your best and for some reason nobody appreciates that, and it really saps your morale down. You feel bad about yourself, and you question even like, am I just the worst person in this program, or do I not understand how things are done? But then you remember the nights you spend in college working and you say, I owe it to myself not to give up. I've come this far, I'm not going to have to give up, and you keep pushing. And as you push, there's something about persistence. And I think life just like picking people who are persistent. As you keep pushing, eventually you realize, oh, I made it. And it's at the point I made it that you say, wow, I didn't know I was that resilient. That old me would have given up, but it just took an extra ounce of determination to get here. And to me, it's those two answers. It's in part because I don't like the idea of giving up, but also I'm discovering myself, and I just want to see how far can I go, and that is what actually makes me keep going forward. Basically, that desire to see how far I can push things.
And you said something earlier about you only see this afterward when you look back. Do I have that correct?
Yes, correct.
And
that is from yeah.
You can see that as you're going along, but only after you're done, or really? Okay.
Yeah, it only makes sense, and that is from Steve Jobs' commencement speech for Stanford University. He talked about how he dropped out of college, how he learned calligraphy from a class he was just hanging out because he didn't want to attend his own engineering classes. But then that calligraphy came to make the Mac stand out in terms of the way the fonts looked on the screen. The only time it really makes sense is looking back. The present can be blurry, the future uncertain, but the past has that certainty. There's no question about the past. There's no risk of like it would not be like this, except you're in some matrix where the past can change. But for a human being, we're scared of the future because we have no idea of the future. We worry about the present because it seems so inconsistent, but the past is given. It's this set of equations, like you're solving a problem and I say, given this data, find this. The past is that data that is given to you. And so you just give it time. Whatever looks crazy now will make sense when it shifts on the time scale to the past. It wouldn't change anymore. It would make sense at that point in time. So,
okay. Thank you, and we're lucky to have you.
Thank you, Dr. Fisher.
All right, I see a question on the chat.
Right, yes, from Lacora Bell. Are there any specific website or orgs you advise we use finding our DNA? Without any purpose of running a commercial here, African DNA is a good one because they work on samples. They've been on the continent and have taken DNA samples of different tribes and communities so they can map you to a specific community. They don't just say, oh, you're from the Congo or you're 2% Cameroon, 7% Nigeria. No, they actually pin you to a community and tell you from there. And as I said, the good thing is in this day and time where money can be an issue, one person can do it and everybody on the maternal side is satisfied. Like, hey, you did it. It means a maternal mitochondrial DNA maps us to these people. So all of us from the mother side, this is where we come from. Okay. So African DNA is a good one. You want to check that out. I think it's founded by someone from a sister HBCU, Howard University. So yeah, that'll be a good one. Thank you, Layla.
I have a question.
Yes, please go ahead, Gaston. Gatson.
All right. Hi, I'm Gavin Gatson. I'm a freshman electrical engineering major from Birmingham, Alabama. I'm actually in the engineering building right now. And I just wanted some advice from you as far as just like your journey through electrical. Did you major in electrical engineering? I was a little bit late to the meeting.
Yes, I
did.
I
Okay, perfect.
Yes.
Yeah. So, do you have any just advice as a young and aspiring electrical engineer as myself?
All right, my advice to you, because as you go forward in electrical, you will have to kind of pick what we call your core. Like maybe you want to do communication, maybe you want to do optics, maybe you want to do semiconductors, right? And I when I used to teach at a community college, I used to tell that to my students, handle your physics classes first, right? Because depending on what part of physics you enjoy the most, it kind of guides you what kind of domain in electrical you would like to do. So for example, if you do physics and you see that you're comfortable with doing resistors and current and voltages, all right, okay, that is your thing. If you do your physics class and you're more in tune to dealing with the non-abstract part like dynamics or momentum and all that stuff, your electrical engineering will be more into robotics and that kind of stuff. So the physics courses, when I took physics, we used to joke around and say God was a physicist, but that's an expensive joke. I wouldn't do that all the time. But because physics is considered the fundamental science, it helps you know where you're really good at. It saves time. Not to say you can decide to lean on something you really like and get better. I will tell you this. I majored in physics, but it took me what? It took me 5 years to get my first pass grade in physics when I was in high school. Not because I wasn't good. I loved the physics, but I just didn't connect the math to the physics. And when I did, it wouldn't stop. When I understood what I'm doing, explaining phenomena can be explained with formulas, that is when I started having my first pass grade. And I eventually majored in physics. And even with everything I do, if you read Unbreakable Chains, I do a lot of physics describing forces, how they interact, just because physics has become part of me. So even if it shows you something you're not good at, it's not a sign for you to quit. It just tells you how much work you will have to put towards that objective. Or if it shows you something you're more comfortable with. So taking those physics classes and the math classes is a good way to prepare yourself for the abstract nature of electrical engineering, because it can get abstract sometimes. So that would be my
It definitely can.
advice.
It definitely can. Thank you.
You're welcome. This is good.
Many other questions? We'll take a few more questions. Seems like nobody's willing to ask questions. All right. If nobody is willing to ask questions, Mr. Mufopa,
Yes,
I
sir.
would just request maybe you leave your audience with a last word or commentary.
All
You
right.
say, oh, I see there is a question. What was the
Yeah,
best
Kevin.
way for you to study? So
Whew.
let's address that before I give you the opportunity to give us the last word.
All right, Kevin Chaney. My best way to study is very, very unusual, but it worked. So at the approach of the final, I used to pick all my books and put them on the bed. So I would be sharing my bed with my books, right? And it will make me uncomfortable. So reading those books and passing my courses was a way of keeping the study going. I don't suggest you necessarily do that, but yeah, my books will be my sleep partner, and it will remind me of the work I have ahead. And as the books reduce from the pile, it tells me how much I'm getting to that finish line. So, but it wasn't like I was prepping only at the end. No. One way to study was and I took it from my father, is read and make your notes in your books. The books, most of us scientists think books are just there for formulas. Read the book, write your summaries in the book, do the examples in the books before doing any problem. The examples have the advantage that they have a solution for you to look at. So you do the examples, and of course, when the final is around the corner, make yourself a little bit uncomfortable. Put the pile of books on your bed and let them remind you that if you want a good sleep, you got some work to do. And eventually, on the last day, when you're done with the final, the bed is all neat and clean for you to crash for 24 hours rest. So that'll be the way I did my. I don't know if it works for everyone, but yeah, I did that. And I see another question. How do you handle and navigate stereotypes of working in your specific STEM field? That is a good one. That is a really good one. Huh. How do I do it? I will say it wasn't easy. There was a time I was kind of mad at everyone because I felt like people didn't understand me. And it wasn't that people didn't understand me. I will go as far as telling you a story where one of my supervisor, when he was getting ready to retire, I went to him to get a talk. And this is cultural. I told him where we come from. When a senior person is retiring, we'll go pay tribute to them and ask for advice. And he told me, yeah, you have the tendency of helping people out without getting credit. And that's where he told me something I didn't know. He said, for over 3 times, I have pushed your name for, like promotions, and every time you got kicked out. And I had to ask the guy why he did that. And the guy said it was, what was the word? Unintentional bias. That was the term they gave him, right? So I was really frustrated during that period. But I'll tell you this: how did I deal with it? My logic has always been this: nobody, and I'm very spiritual when I say this. I don't know if it applies to everyone, but I say to everyone, people give promotion and God gives anointing. That's how I look at it. The promotion they give you, they can take it. But the anointing you get from God doesn't go, even if you don't use it. So once I feel I'm anointed for something specific, do all you want. I don't even worry. I know someone will see it come my way. And once you would, I say this, once you make a mistake and give me the opportunity, you will regret giving me that opportunity, because there will be no way you will stop me from going where I have to go. So just be ready. When you face stereotypes, you can't change people's mind by just talking, but you can be ready for them to give you a chance and prove them wrong. So that's how I handled it, and I still do that way. Every time I get a chance, like even this chance of talking with my fellow Tuskegee students, I want to give my best so that the other people who are watching understand what it means to be part of Tuskegee. And whatever stereotype, I want them to know we are this diverse and beautiful community at Tuskegee, and that we're going for big things, you know. So yeah, it's just being ready, and when the opportunity comes, you want to go strong. The other questions, how long would you say it took you to learn the time management of studying, schoolwork, to prevent the feeling of always having something to do? I still have that feeling of I still have something to do. But the difference is that I build on that feeling. When I have that feeling, I actually find something to do. I don't just dwell on the feeling. The tendency we have is feeling overwhelmed and just giving up. I try not to do that. I try to tell myself I will do my best. As a matter of fact, when I'm taking a final, for example, I don't step out. I do not step out. I stay there and I said, I've been to every lecture and I've done my assignment, so there's nothing here that I do not know. In due time, it will come back to me. And it's the same with that feeling. If you feel like there's still something to do the little bit you can do. Then do the other bit you can do. Then do the other bit you can do. Slowly, you're chopping down that big block of things to do into a smaller block. And you're learning how to deal with that feeling of having something to do. The other one, all right, okay. That was someone asking about the recording. All right. You're welcome. So Professor Bill asked me to give my last words. I will borrow from someone I religiously listen to, and I will say this: if there's something you hold at heart, which in this case is rewriting our history, there are two things you have to do. Do it without complacency. Don't be complacent about it. Do it as if it all depended on you. But please don't be condescending when you do it. Do not hurt people in the course of doing it. There's always a beautiful way to do the thing. And if you bet on humanity, you will never go wrong. Never. There will be one person that you'll be able to save. You wouldn't save everybody, but there'll be one person you can save. And that one person could be you alone. That's fine. So the work ahead is, the challenge is big. But trust me, the support you get from the people before, the people after, is bigger than the challenge. You just have to do it without complacency and without being condescending. That's all I'll have to say. And thank you guys so much.
Wow, thank you very much. I think I would solicit that everybody who is still on the call should, unmute and give our speaker a big round of applause. Please, just unmute. I just want to hear the applause coming from everybody.
Woo! Woo!
Thank you.
TU.
You
know.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for coming. And I look forward to having you at our next interdisciplinary seminar series event, which is coming up on Friday with Dr. Dorothy Brown, who will be talking to us about the U.S. tax code and systemic racism in the U.S. tax code. So please join on Friday, same time, 4 o'clock, for a riveting discussion. Thank you very much. You have a blessed and wonderful day.
Thank you,